Hello and welcome to Politics Today, and in this week's programme we shall be discussing the shameful reaction on behalf of the British government to the escalating Israeli-Iran crisis. And in this programme today I'm joined by Helen Spiby from the Christian People's Alliance. Welcome to the programme, Helen. And of course, Melanie Symonds, the editor of Heart newspaper. So welcome to the programme. I see that, Melanie, you are dressed in the attire of the Israeli Air Force, which is very appropriate for today's programme. But share with us, with the important newspaper that you produce, which is Heart newspaper, why there is so much focus and emphasis on Israel, and why it's so important that Christians understand God's heart and love for Israel as foretold in God's precious word, which is the Bible.
Well, it is, I just want to give a bit of testimony, because going back to when I started the paper, I wanted to put more about Israel in, because back in about 2011, Netanyahu was Prime Minister then, around then, and he was saying that it's 1938. And I actually dared to put that on the cover. And he was talking about Iran then, and the nuclear build-up. And I think that the Lord, I want to put more in about Alia as well, and the Lord said to me, they're not ready. But I've gradually been able to introduce it, because when the Lord got me to do the paper, I was already a Christian Zionist. I'd been to loads of Christian Friends of Israel, Prayer for Israel meetings, heard people like Lance Lambert, Derek Prince, had been thoroughly convinced and had the revelation. And it's a revelation. And my current prayer is that all the young people who are becoming Christians in this quiet revival will be in churches or come across people who teach them, or just reading the Bible, about the importance of Israel, that it is the apple of God's eye.
Amen to that, and thank you. And Helen, great to see you back on Politics Today. Share with us why the Christian People's Alliance stand with Israel, and why this is important as a political party of a Christian makeup, that you stand with Israel.
Thanks, Simon. Yes, Christian People's Alliance does stand with Israel, and I think there's one testimony I would also like to share is in the general election, candidates were given the opportunity, if they wanted to put the Israeli flag, a small icon on their leaflets, and that gave all the candidates an opportunity to really seek the Lord in prayer and be convicted of their support, to stand individually. Do I really believe in Israel and what they stand for enough? You know, to actually put it on the leaflet, knowing that that would absolutely sabotage a lot of their chances in the natural. And so we did, most of us did, and we got comments, but the joy was actually going around the houses when you actually had got that maybe 100 and 200 people, they saw that and they would respond positively. And although they might not necessarily be able to support us in the election, they expressed a huge gratitude that people cared, especially that we were prepared to make that sacrifice. I mean, also there's obviously lots of reasons why as a party we would want to stand for Israel even outside our Christian faith. It's their ancestral homeland. The land has a connection to those people. Brits who are brought up here make Aliyah, and they all express this connection with the land that they've not actually grown up in, that they want to return to. So yes, we pray for Israel, we support Israel financially as well.
Well done, that's great. And Melanie, where do we start? I mean, what we saw in the early hours of Friday the 13th of June was nothing less than extraordinary. I've been waiting almost 2 decades now for Israel to actually take on the Iranian regime and actually do some serious damage to their nuclear weapons program. But share with us your thoughts as the news broke that at 3:30 Israeli time that 240 Israeli jets took off to destroy the Natanz nuclear site, also to take out the Revolutionary Guard commanders, nuclear scientists, Iran's air defense missile systems, which was absolutely extraordinary.
Well, obviously, you know, one regrets that those commanders and nuclear scientists had to lose their lives, but the Lord only knows the state of their hearts, and you know, if in the last minutes they called on the name of the Lord and were saved. It was a brilliant operation, and deaths aside, I just find it thrilling, actually. I mean, I've just been thrilled the last few days. And of course, it was day 61. President Trump had given the Iranians 3 months, wasn't it? 2 months, 60 days to reach an agreement. And of course, they were spinning it out. the Iranians. And so on day 61, the Israelis started. But it's interesting, Simon, because we discussed this previously and you thought that the Americans wouldn't give Netanyahu permission.
And clearly, Melanie, if it hadn't been for Donald Trump giving Israel the green light, those attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities wouldn't have happened. Give us your thoughts, Helen, on the fact that the daring courage and the bravery shown by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and also the pilots of the Israeli Air Force plus the Mossad in carrying out operations inside Iran have not only saved Israel from a potential Holocaust, but this time a nuclear Holocaust, but also that Israel's done the world a favour and made the world a safer place. So give us your thoughts.
Yeah, well, actually what came to mind was what happened last April when, last year, when Iran actually stepped out from behind its proxies and sent a direct attack to Israel. And I think it was something like over 300 ballistic missiles, cruise missiles and UAVs were sent over. And that is enough munition actually to wipe out the entire population 3 times over. If it hadn't have been for the defensive shield, obviously this would have been another atrocity in the making, with civilians, you know, the whole population wiped out. Now, imagine that capability in conventional warfare, now it's stepped up to nuclear warfare. And it's the bravery of actually having to take on and go in there. We've seen all these heroic rescues and everything. I actually am so much in admiration. And the fact is they're not just protecting their own people, they are on the front lines. The whole of the global community is at stake. And I think the ordinary person on the street is actually relieved to know that somebody is bothering to actually tackle these bullies who are wanting to actually spread this kind of violence and oppression all over the world.
Absolutely. And Melanie, share with us your thoughts on how, when the actual attack was actually taking place, when the Israeli jets were taking out Iran's nuclear facilities, the British government, particularly David Lammy and our Prime Minister Keir Starmer, were very much surprised. They almost thought that they were in the dark. And David Lammy was due to meet with his counterpart, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, but had to cancel that meeting and his flight to Washington DC because of what was happening in the Middle East. Share with us, why do you think our government was so surprised that the Israelis didn't inform them of their intentions to take out Iran's nuclear facilities?
Dear. Yes, well, I mean, only a few days earlier, David Lammy he and Keir Starmer had spoken against Israel in the House of Commons, and other MPs had completely got the wrong end of the stick about the deaths which were happening at the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, the aid distribution centre, and there was some nasty things said in the Commons. And then David Lammy had announced these sanctions against 2 of cabinet ministers, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who are loosely labelled far right or whatever, trying to make out they're sort of fascists in the Israeli government or something. And so this was a very hostile act, and they made sanctions against them, and it was all based on a dodgy report, so-called settler violence. And according to what I read the other day, this settler violence, the stats, it actually includes the Palestinian attacks. Yeah. I mean, I haven't once heard our government condemn the murder of that Orthodox young mother who was on the way to the delivery room. She and her baby have died and the husband's left. It's absolutely unbelievable. We don't hear of that condemned in the House of Commons. And so it seems that the government really gets the wrong end of the stick, whether it's deliberate or whether they are actually trying to appease their just 5 pro-Gaza MPs, I don't know.
I mean, what was so disturbing, I think I was away on annual leave when David Lammy decided to sanction the 2 controversial Israeli ministers. But he hasn't, as you said, singled out the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, that ever since the Palestinian Authority has come into existence, really out of the Oslo Accords in 1993, every day they've been inciting hatred and violence and incitement to terrorism against Israel. and yet there's been no sanctions, there's no condemnation from this government, and you have two controversial Israeli ministers of state who are claimed that they're inciting violence against the Palestinians and their sanctions placed. But when those sanctions should be, if that is what they're doing to the Israelis, then they should do the same to the Prime Minister. And knowing that Israel is a democratic ally of the West and not an enemy, you wonder who this government is supporting. Anyway, Helen, isn't it not a damning indictment on our nation that they are constantly, particularly with David Lammy, is constantly singling out Israel every single time for condemnation, stopping the supply of missiles and weapons, supporting the international criminal courts, wanting to bring prosecution of crimes of genocide against the Israeli Prime Minister for what's happening for defending Israel and destroying Hamas in Gaza, and now singling out two ministers, and now he's come out and say that Israel should kind of respect the situation and de-escalate.
Yeah, I mean, it really goes beyond the imagination what he's thinking, and it's definitely a damning indictment of our nation, absolutely. There's so many international atrocities going on. The fact, not to mention even the Christian Armenians that were displaced in the recent years, 120,000, I believe, and...
from Nagorno-Karabakh.
That's right. So he basically is singling out a couple of the MPs and accusing them of inciting violence against Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank, as he puts it. Settled violence, as he puts it, you rightly said, that's a very pejorative way of explaining it. But the UK sanctions is quite interesting because, first of all, they have been banned from coming to the UK, which I don't think they were particularly planning to do anyway, and seizing of their assets. Well, I don't think they've got any assets in the UK, so it's all very fake, it's all very posturing, and this is the background for the sanctions. As you mentioned, it's quite counterfeit, and this is a government who is actually supposed to be acting with integrity. How can they make good decisions if the information that they have to make these decisions on is not actually correct? So the other interesting thing, you mentioned that report, Melanie. So I actually have some of those statistics. I'll just read them out. So this is all about the claims of settled violence, and the new report by Israel's Regavim movement NGO, there's 90% of the incidents of violence from Jews in Judea and Samaria in recent years were actually UN fabrications, so they've gone into the details. An analysis of the 6,285 incidents documented by the United Nations showed that some 90% of the alleged acts in Judea and Samaria did not take place in the disputed territory, but in eastern Jerusalem. All were entirely peaceful, such as visits by Israeli Jews to Temple Mount, as well as legal activities such as civilian hikes or infrastructure work. Filtered, when it's filtered to verify these incidents, the violence incidents by Israeli Jews against Palestinians, it turns out the list shrinks to just 833 cases over a period of 7.5 years. And once they further looked into those and dig deeper down, it turned out that many of these confirmed cases were anti-Israel provocations, foreign activists or terrorists who were injured or eliminated.
Yeah, and I don't think we should make British foreign policy on the hoof of watching a Louis Theroux documentary, which seems to be exactly what this British government has done. So thank you for clarifying that one. I visited those Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, and they are like fortresses because they have to be, with the threat of violence they face from Palestinians. But you'll find those that are neighbours, they work, they provide so many jobs and opportunities for their Arab residents and their Arab neighbours, and these communities are absolutely beautiful communities. But it's only because this is in the biblical heartland of Israel, which is Judea, where the Jews come from, that there is such a fundamental attack on them. Melanie, share with us your thoughts. A lot of reports are coming out over the last few days that, and the British government is going out of its way to say that the Royal Air Force, the RAF, has not helped to intercept the ballistic missiles that the Iranians have fired at Israel. since Friday the 13th of June, sadly killing around 26 people, destroying neighbourhoods like in Bet Yam, where we've seen residential apartment blocks being destroyed by those ballistic missiles. On the previous occasions, twice last year, in 2024, the Royal Air Force helped to intercept those ballistic missiles fired at Israel, but our government is going out of the way to saying there is no British involvement whatsoever. Isn't that damning in itself?
It is very damning because I would like to think that it is true and they're keeping quiet, but the fact they are keeping quiet is out of fear. And there is almost, as we were talking earlier, I was sort of realising the depth of the fear of Islam over this nation. It's a spiritual issue and it needs some strong leaders to stand up and reject this and say we are not going to live under this, because that is what I believe is now informing the political decisions. There is it's been creeping in for years and we've just let it go in our sort of British way, like, oh, we mustn't put up Christmas trees, it might offend other religions. Hello, this is our country, is a Christian nation and we have a Christian heritage. So I would like to think that the RAF is actually quietly helping. I mean, I have read this on some of our Telegram sources, I'm sure other viewers have, and I've found myself praying that the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, and the RAF and the Americans Air Force will have good communications. There'll be no friendly fire incidents, and I don't think I'd be led to pray that if there wasn't something going on.
Well, Israel's under CENTCOM, which is an American command in the Middle East, so the Americans will be fully aware of everything that's happening and taking place as well. But the big question is, will Trump now get involved and will the American Air Force finish the job off to permanently destroy Iran's nuclear weapons program and put an end to this absolute horror and disaster and of this regime? I just want to read something, because as of the filming of this program, there's an article in the Daily Mail that came out saying that David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, spoke to Parliament, and he's saying that military action won't work, and he's calling for Israel to have diplomacy with the Iranian regime to stop them having nuclear weapons. But knowing what Israel has done over the past few days, doesn't this show that military action does work, and that Israel has pushed back Iran's nuclear weapons ambition at least for a decade, if not more, if not bring about the collapse of this regime, which diplomacy never would have worked, because the Iranians are they're a class act when it comes to deception, lies, misinformation. And how does David Lammy think that we can negotiate with a totalitarian regime that wants not only to destroy Israel, but destroy the Western world?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Simon. And it's the whole thing is really worrying, obviously, nuclear threat. And I personally am relieved that they are stepping into the gap and doing something about it. David Lammy saying that actually military intervention won't work. As you say, military intervention is work. It's the only way forward, because they've been negotiating for 14 years and they've come to the point where now they say, well, they're not complying anymore. So what do we do with that? And David Lammy says, well, leave them to their own devices. Is that what he's suggesting? It's very, very difficult actually for anybody to say what to do, but I'm just really relieved that the Israelis are actually doing something about this. Now, I have a bit of an experience. Last year in the general election, David Lammy, he's the MP for Tottenham, and we had a candidate standing there. It's actually in my constituency. I'm next door to that. And so at the count, so we saw David Lammy arrive quite late in the day to be greeted with a whole cacophony of violent shouts against him, heckling and very aggressive sounding messages to him. Now this is what he is on the front line of this. These were members of his own party that are opposing him and actually threatening, like what you said, Melanie, this kind of oppression that comes through Islamism. It's affected our nation. I mean, we're talking about the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, 1979. They were determined, their goal was actually to destroy the Western ideas, Western society, and instead install their own Shia Muslim regime across the West. So although we've kind of like been living our lives in denial of it. Certainly our leaders have. So this is why we come to the point now. The fact that the leaders don't want to speak out about it shows really the depth that these ideas have become ingrained and embedded in our society.
And Melanie, share with us your thoughts, because we know that we have the G7 summit taking place in Canada right now. Our Prime Minister, ever since he learned of Israel's attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, has constantly called for restraint from both sides. Our former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has called him out, saying he's no Churchill. But the danger is an understanding that the enemies of Israel are our enemies, and that by eliminating the Iranian nuclear threat, not only is Israel saving herself and the Middle East, but also the entire Western world. Can't Keir Starmer understand that what Israel's done has done the world an absolute favour, and instead of attacking Israel, we should be supporting and encouraging and praising the bravery and the courage shown by the Israeli Prime Minister and the nation of Israel to take on the Iranian regime all by themselves?
Well, I'm going back to the previous question. I'm actually quite encouraged that we have moved one of our aircraft carriers nearer to the Middle East. So I'm hoping that actions speak louder than words. I think that Keir Starmer is saying this kind of thing just for the home audience. You know, let's have some restraint, let's be careful, let's not upset anyone. But because we all know this doesn't work. The only language which works in the Middle East is force. And for David Lammy to believe this as well, he must, well, to sound as if he believes it, I mean, I can only assume he's being badly briefed. But I'm sure they must know in their heart of hearts. But as you said, they are afraid to say so for the home audience. And it is disappointing. And I'm just thinking on the way up here how our country has lost vision, or without vision, my people perish. We used to stand up for the underdog. That's why we went into World War II. We're not standing up for the underdog now. You've got tiny Israel, a little sliver of land, taking on mighty Iran, which is what, 77 times bigger? And you know, with skill and ingenuity, taking out a mighty nation. And I mean, I'm praying for regime change, because they are by please Lord, aiming for regime change, even if they're not quite saying, although I think Netanyahu is trying to encourage the Iranian people. We went and did, the British and the Americans, we went and did regime change in Iran and Libya with much more slender reasons.
Sorry, Iraq.
Sorry, Iraq,
yeah.
Yes.
But the Israelis might be tempted to take out regime change, particularly if they take out the Supreme Leader autonomy. Ayatollah Khomeini, they've already taken out the TV station with this propaganda, Iranian propaganda from the regime.
They were cursing, the woman presenter in her hijab, she was actually cursing Israel at that point. And you had this crash behind her. It's priceless.
You don't mess with Israel. And Helen, just give us your thoughts on how Israel is not only defending herself, but also defending the brave and courageous people of Iran. And it's so important to know that 80% of the population in Iran are against the regime and actually supporting Israel's strikes against the IRGC, and they approve of everything that Israel's doing. Isn't that in itself an extraordinary story that really doesn't get much airing beyond pro-Israel circles?
Yeah, you're right, Simon. I've heard this as well. Christians from Iran, who they've been displaced when we had this regime change in the 70s, and they haven't actually accepted what happened to them. Even the children going through the system, unlike in other areas in Gaza, the children have not actually allowed, or somehow or other the population there has resisted the indoctrination that they've been facing. And it is absolutely a spiritual battle. And Israel and Iran used to have a lovely relationship. I think they supplied oil and they worked together in the region. But then that was all destroyed with this new agenda which seeks to spread this regime across the West. And it is so disappointing, but we just, like as Melanie said, to pray for regime change, to pray for the Christians and all the other minority groups that were in Iran before, that they would not give up hope, and that behind the scenes there's a lot of support ongoing that we might never hear about.
Yeah, I just want to read out a statement by our ambassador to the UN, Barbara Woodward, who said the following in a United Nations security meeting, and this is the British policy position on the crisis between Israel and Iran. So she said, "Today we've spoken to Israel at the highest levels, and our foreign secretary has also spoken to the Iranian foreign minister, Garachi. We have urged both sides to show restraint and de-escalate tensions. We continue to engage partners across the region to ensure we are effectively dropping our utmost to push for a peaceful outcome. The UK, in partnership with the E3, has always championed diplomatic solutions to address Iran's nuclear escalation, which has no credible civilian justification. We will not be deterred from this. As my Prime Minister said today, we have long held concerns about Iran's nuclear program documented by the IAEA. Israel also needs to protect its people and its security. It is therefore in the interests of all actors to stop military confrontation and pursue a negotiated solution. President, this is the time for a strong, united position from members of this council. We must take urgent action to escalate and provide opportunity for a return to diplomacy." Now, isn't that a weak and contradictory statement made by our ambassador in the UN?
Yes, completely. It doesn't make sense because it's asking the UN Security Council to put more pressure on Iran and Israel. It's always Israel which is lent on more. We've seen that throughout the Gaza war. They don't lean on Hamas because Hamas are a hardened terrorist group. In the same way, Iran is a hardened terrorist regime, and they're a repressive regime. You can't just put sort of military pressure on them.
Melanie,
sorry, not military pressure, but
yeah, very good.
Yes.
So Melanie and Helen, thank you so much for doing a great job today. I really appreciate it, and thanks for your contribution. Thank you for watching this programme home, which has gone very fast. We are living in extraordinary times. We want our nation to be blessed. We want the blessing of the Lord upon our nation. And we know from Genesis 12 chapters, verses 1 to 3, that our nation will only be blessed if we stand with Israel and the Jewish people. So our government needs to turn course, back Israel, because Israel has done the world a favour by standing against the totalitarian regime that is Iran. So thank you for watching Politics Today.